they aren't really irrelevant branches of science. They're just science branches which not yet have had their prime.
Hello, and welcome to Biofilm Podcast, a show that brings you to the forefront of biomedical research, biotech, pharma, and healthcare fields, and the professionals behind it. I'm your host, Pavel Rzhov. My guest today is Dr. Peter Teriete, a research assistant professor at SBP Medical Discovery Institute and a chief scientific officer at San Diego startup TumorGen MDx. Peter has had a fascinating journey bringing him from Germany to the United Kingdom and then to the United States. Coincidentally, my professional journey took me to similar destinations, and that's why it was a pleasure to get introduced to him a few years ago. Today, we will find out more about his continued fascination with biophysics, his entrepreneurial endeavors, and find out what kind of German wine he likes best. Welcome to the podcast, Peter.
Well, thank you, Pavel. I really appreciate the invitation. And as you rightfully pointed out, our paths have crossed a few years back, and it's been a pleasure working alongside as a colleague with you.
I had an honor to get asked one of the first questions in the presentation that I delivered in my first year of PhD studies by you. I didn't know you at the time, and your question, well, your NMR-related question, just took me a little bit aback. But this was, I guess, what set me up to be more prepared to answer these questions going forward. So I really appreciate that.
I suppose. You're welcome.
So I'd like to ask my guests a movie-related question in the beginning of the podcast. So I'm a huge Quentin Tarantino fan, and one of my favorite movies of his is Inglourious Basterds, which coincidentally takes place in a number of places that we both used to live in. I wonder, do you like that movie? And if not, what kind of movie or TV show brings you back to the different places that you used to live?
So I do like Quentin Tarantino and his movies. I do like his take on taking maybe some historical facts and just running crazy with it. So I thought Inglourious Basterds was just a fun romp, and he's been pretty good in getting fantastic actors, and often finding actors who suddenly give amazing performances in his movies. So no, I definitely enjoy that. Other movies that take me to places, there are a few, and I've been very fortunate in my early life that I traveled a lot. From young age, my parents loved traveling. I think age of 3, I probably crisscrossed Europe more than many people have in their lifetime, and lived obviously abroad in the UK and the US, but my parents lived abroad in India, in Taiwan, across aspects of the world. Through them, I got to travel Australia, Africa, and many other locations. So I often find that some movies take me to a very specific place somewhere in this journey. So I sometimes see a movie which maybe features around about like Jaipur in India, and then suddenly it throws me back taking the Pink City Express from New Delhi down to Jaipur when I was 14 years old, and stuff like this. So I love movies, and I love catching a scene of something I'm familiar with.
Yeah. Do you recall what movie we actually have had a chance to see together? Was that some kind of superhero movie?
That was one of the recent Avengers one, I believe, right?
Yeah, it might have been.
May have been the Infinity Wars or Endgame. I can't remember which one.
Probably Infinity War. So, but on the subject of, like, say, Marvel movies, I remember watching the first Avengers here in San Diego when I was back in college, and then seeing maybe the next Avengers. Gosh, I think it might have been in Germany, and then seeing like a Captain America in the UK, and then coming back here and seeing all the rest of them. So I definitely have, like, kind of similar to you, these experiences of going to see movies in different countries under different circumstances. So that's why I could definitely relate to what you're saying, like being able to experience this and kind of go back to it in your memory. This is fantastic. So this actually leads me perfectly to the question that I had. Where was this, as you say, you traveled a lot. Was the path that ultimately took you to the United States something that was predetermined to you from an early age, or you actually wanted to maybe stay in one place when you were growing up and actually get your education, like in Germany, for example?
Yeah, I mean, my path to the US is well, in hindsight, you look at things and sometimes it's like, oh yeah, it's a fairly linear track, but the reality is, of course, I never planned it that way. I started my undergrad at the University of Aachen in Germany in straight up chemistry. But I've always had a much bigger fascination with the life science aspect of science, the biochemistry and biophysics. So after the first semester, within the first semester, I kind of reoriented myself and decided to leave Aachen and actually go back to my hometown in Krefeld and join the technical university there with a specialty in biochemical engineering. Because I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to get a much stronger biochemistry background and then potentially build up upon that. I did this for a few years, and it was great. It went well. But I always realized that, of course, modern science is an English speaking. English is the language of modern science. It used to be German many years back.
Yeah.
But for sure it is, and particularly life science, it's English. So I decided to take an internship at the University of Leeds in '95. I had an opportunity at a lab of Andreas Holzenburg, a fantastic electron microscopy scientist. And he took me on without really knowing me. It was almost a cold call I made out to him, and gave me the opportunity to join his lab for a year. Mm-hmm. And my ambition there was basically go to the UK, really firm up my English, and of course get some amazing science experience and have some fun along the way too.
Yeah.
So I packed my mom's car with assortment of things and drove out there. And I certainly remember somewhere on the journey thinking, "Oh my God, what am I doing?"
So can you actually take me back to that just a little bit more? How did you actually go about finding that professor over at Leeds? Was there like email communication?
Well, email existed already, but it was definitely more fax and actually letters, written letters. So during my undergrad, doing the biochemical engineering degree, I had to do various internships in Germany, and one of them was in a textile research institute. My hometown is famous or has a long history in textile. And the one of the German textile research institutes is based there, and it's physically right next to the university. And so I ended up doing an internship there and continued as like a student assistant in the lab for a few years, and ended up having my own little projects and having a lot of fun. But one of the PIs there had a connection to the University of Leeds, and Leeds, again, a strong textile industry. And the university has the textile department is one of the oldest and longest standing in the UK. So they gave me a connection there, and I crafted a letter of introduction. I crafted, so to speak, an application for an internship. I got help from my old English teacher. For my high school. I approached him and he helped me with that. And it was sent out, and the people in the textile department just looked at it and it's like, we have no idea what to do with this. And they ended up in the pub one evening talking to some colleagues in the biochemistry department, and they were saying, "Oh, we got this crazy German who wants to come for work for free for a year, and we don't really know why, because he wants to do biochemistry." And then I ended up in the hands of Andreas Holzenburg, who somehow took pity on me, I suppose, and took me in.
Or had a providence of saying, okay, this might be a great scientist going forward.
Maybe.
So where did the fascination for science specifically come from? I assume maybe if you had this opportunity to travel to so many different places, you inherently had some kind of fascination with maybe nature and how people live. But what about the life sciences that attracted you the most?
So life science, and this is the funny thing, that you look back, you sometimes see that string and you just didn't realize it along the way that it's there. The science always came fairly easy to me. So in high school, I was a middle of the road student. I had subject matters I was great at. I had subject matters I kind of really struggled. I was not an A student. I was not a C student. It was just like middle of the road. But science, chemistry, physics, biology always came really easy to me. The teacher introduced a new concept, and I was just like, yeah, that makes sense. And it just, and other subject matters not the same. So I always felt my affinity was very strong there. And then life science, to the day, I would love to find it again. There was a documentary I watched on German television, and it was about X-ray crystallography. And it showed researchers at the University of Berkeley looking at a 3D projection of a protein. In those days, it was obviously a wire model, very, very simple, back from the 70s or 80s. And I was absolutely hooked. I thought this is the most amazing thing. These guys look actually at a protein, at the structure, obviously a model of it, but on an atomic resolution. And that really fascinated me. It was a very, very strong impact. And I wasn't sitting there at that moment. It's like, oh, this is what I have to do. But I realized it was an image, or it was a scene that really sort of like focused my direction.
Yeah, I could relate to that in the sense, I remember a lecture on protein structures back in high school where I was like, this is so fascinating, this tertiary structure. And even though I didn't start to study protein structure, specifically structural biology, until later on, and I never had a class on that, but I remember when I was in Germany, I happened to stumble upon a protein folding handbook in the library, and I started reading that, like denaturation curves and things like that. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. And so I could relate to this, being fascinated with proteins. But I always had this sort of conundrum. I thought like proteins are super fascinating, and DNA in my mind is less so. Do you feel that way? Maybe like DNA or nucleic acids in general are less fascinating?
To me, they are, and this is not by any means detracting from amazing work people do on DNA. And of course, we learn more and more about the complexity, how this actually functions, and RNA gets involved in so many levels. So no, I do not detract from that, but personally, I can relate to your thought there. It is, for me, is amino acids, proteins, the core machinery, structure of life. I always feel is so strongly associated to proteins and biology.
So in your research in Oxford, like how did that start for you from transitioning from Leeds into the PhD? Did you already like commit yourself at that point to doing just science and really following this maybe true academic track, if you will?
Yeah, the science, I would say that was for sure when I was in my final year at Leeds and finishing off. And what actually happened, just to finish that part, that arc of after my internship, I actually decided to stay in the UK, and I transferred and finished my undergrad at the University of Leeds. The department there was phenomenal in accepting me and giving me some credit for my previous work. So that's how I ended up in Leeds for basically 3 years. And then towards the end, when I was looking for my next step, and I was pretty set on pursuing a PhD. And I was fortunate, the UK system, if you finish your undergrad, at least it used to be in those days, if you finish your undergrad with a certain grade or above, you can actually move straight into a PhD program. You don't have to go through a master first. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate that I scraped into those areas. And I found myself looking for opportunities. And because of my internship, I was still very fascinated with electron microscopy, and applied for a PhD position with Maureen van Heel at Imperial College in London, Helen Seibel at Birkbeck, John Finlay in Leeds, and I had about 4 or 5 offers provided to me, and people were saying like, hey, we would like you to join our lab. And then I came to Oxford for a long weekend to see a friend, and ended up chatting to Tony Day, who was looking for a PhD student, and we were chatting for about 10 minutes, and he offered me a position in his lab.
So amazing. Wow.
So it was I would say the takeaway for me was always, you never know what opportunities arise. Just be ready to maybe grasp or take one, if it comes along.
Yeah, I would say that this kind of story, I guess, reminds me, or just has a notion of like science in this almost like romantic and poetic way. Like especially UK, I guess, has a storied history of these grandiose discoveries or
Right.
conversations in a pub where people come up with these fascinating ideas to try and test them. This sounds like one of those stories where people just happenstance bump into each other and just decide to set on this adventure, basically.
It's definitely a reason what attracted me to stay in the UK. Germany, as you are aware, has a still very strong hierarchical setup in science. And growing up in that system, I didn't know better. It was fine. But then coming to the UK, I was really smitten by how accessible everybody was in the department. I mean, the highest ranking professor, Nobel laureates who came for special lectures would just happily buy you a pint in the pub afterwards. I
Yeah.
mean, not it was normal.
Yeah.
And as a measly undergrad, I was just like, oh my god, this is amazing. So
Do you think that America can learn a thing or two from that? I mean, we could say that America is very open country and very welcoming, peer, has a peer system. But I feel, to some degree, maybe UK has a maybe, I don't know, something to it, like that kind of interaction that is maybe due to its longer history of doing science. Like, do you think there is a difference between the two countries in that
I
regard?
think there is, and I have thought about this. I thought about what are the differences. The US has a fantastic history of science as well, of course, particularly over the last 100 years, so to speak. But aspects of the mixing of a social level, I feel never quite, or maybe they had it in the US and it got lost. The 4 o'clock tea hour in the UK
I missed it.
right. It's just like, at a certain time, everybody just stops pretty much what they're doing, plants there, and you go and have a cup of tea and a digestive. And it's an opportunity to give your brain a break, but it's an opportunity to maybe just run a thought past a colleague from a different lab, different discipline. And people were always very happy to talk about your research and their research. So so the exchange on a personal level, I thought, was always very positive.
Yeah.
And I do miss those aspects. And sometimes you went for a pint after work as well. And again, the social aspect, this was really an extension of a work environment, just in a more relaxed setting.
I completely understand this. Like, having had a chance of just even being in UK for 3.5 months, like just being submerged in that atmosphere in University of Cambridge just gave me that taste of, like, I wish my science experience was always like that, where you have these social environments that you go for a pint, you go for a cup of tea. Like, this is such a staples of doing research that I had at the time. I was like, okay, I have to have this going forward. Granted, maybe I didn't have that in America as much, but at least I had a chance to experience that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it shows itself as well how a PhD program is executed. In the UK, a PhD student largely is on their own feet. I mean, they got to pick a project. They often have a mentorship from the PI or a senior, maybe a senior PhD student, maybe a postdoc. It's set up for about a 3.5 year turnover, which means you don't necessarily have a long-standing number of PhD students in a lab. It's usually a smaller number, and it's more staff scientists and postdoc. But you are thrown at the deep end much faster, and you gotta take charge of your project much faster. And that means, though, you can often decide some directionality of your project more, and the interaction with your colleagues becomes more relevant. You not just only have a mentor who gives you advice, but you very actively have to seek out help and advice from colleagues.
So this, again, UK sounds like a perfect environment for doing research. So what changed? Like, why did you want to leave such a perfect place?
So, as with everything, I mean, I loved staying and being in the UK. I ended up staying in Oxford for 7 years. I did my PhD and I did a postdoc with Jim McDonnell in NMR, structural biochemistry. And then I thought, okay, I want to enter my next phase. I want to get a postdoc in another lab with an advancement, not just like a continuation of what I know already. And I found out that Francesca Marassi, was looking for a postdoc in La Jolla, California, and Francesca was well known for her work on protein membrane embedded and protein NMR solution state and solid state. And I thought that would be a great opportunity to actually learn something new. And my PhD work was on the extracellular domain, but was on a membrane-associated, membrane-embedded protein already. So in my cryo-EM work, I did membrane-embedded protein. So I always felt the membrane is the place to be. So and it's a pretty important part in biology anyway. I applied. I called Francesca. I called her on the phone. I talked to her. I sent her my CV. We exchanged, and she gave me the opportunity to come to San Diego. And so in 2005, I packed a bag and came over.
How difficult that move must have been. Again, like I just sort of keep thinking that UK has, I guess, a number of places to keep learning and keep growing. I mean, was that just something that was a hard call to make, or is this just came naturally to you?
No, it was a hard call to make, and I did not anticipate to then be in the US for 15 years, to be honest. So I expected, I'm going to go to California. I'm going to do my postdoc 2-3 years, and just focus on it. And my expectation was I'm going to go back to the UK. For my next steps afterwards. And well, it took me a couple of years. I love being in Francesca's lab. We did some good science. We published great papers. So I'm very, very happy about this. But in 2007, I met my now wife. So as so often, there are sometimes external factors that keep you longer in a place.
Yeah. Okay. That explains it then. The America swayed you with its beauty.
Absolutely. And I really, that was certainly not the only reason I stayed. I mean, I love living in San Diego. I really enjoy being at the Burnham Institute, or Sanford Burnham Prebys Medical Discovery Institute. I think it has been a great environment for me to grow scientifically, and certainly to grow as well as a mentor and as a growing scientist in other capacities than just on the science.
So let's maybe stick with just science for a little bit longer. So as a biophysicist, obviously you have fascination with protein structures. And since you had so many years of experience, doing experiments yourself, maybe helping others do them, like what are what are your thoughts about the type of work that you do? Like, how does that evolve over time for you, and maybe your relationship with science? Do you feel ownership of your projects now more, and what kind of questions or challenges you sort of are facing today then, and how does that compare to where you started?
This is a good question because it's a little bit bivalent. I mean, you have at some point in a career, of course, you sometimes move away from being the front of the bench scientist. And I was always fine with that because, you have grad students, you have postdocs, you have other people you work with who might be the one executing an experiment. But the problem, of course, is that the advancement for junior scientists has become very, very difficult. The number of academic positions, the type of positions are really competitive. And I sometimes feel if you don't bring your 3 Nature papers and your 2 R1s in your bag, it's like almost impossible to really get the faculty position. On the other hand, of course, I achieved a certain comfort level at the Institute and worked with fantastic people after Francesca as well. I left Francesca's lab in 2010, I believe, and started working with Nick Coslet, and shifted more into the chemical biology side, where I did a lot more project management, grant writing, project conception, and structural biophysical support in the small molecule drug discovery space. So my role shifted a little bit from a pursuit of a hardcore academic career to, let's look, how can we really put a team effort into finding therapeutic solutions or therapeutic angles for all the
Hmm.
proteins I'm looking at.
Hmm. So do you feel like an academic career, purely academic career, is something that you're maybe not thinking about going down, down the line 5-10 years from now? You don't want to be a professor?
I do want to be a professor, but I'm trying to be realistic as well, that the path is not going to be the as linear as people say, postdoc, assistant professor, and so forth. So I we'll see. I mean, I continue to engage. I continue to try to find the opportunities that give me that next step. On the other side, I don't want to be just tied to this one desire, this one goal, because I realize there are many aspects of science, but many aspects, of course, that make me very happy.
Hmm.
It, yeah.
I was just going to ask, so do you feel some kind of frustration when it comes to this nonlinear progression to get to the tenure? Like, how, as a person who actually I think really wants to make a difference in that type of role, like, do you feel like you experience these roadblocks, and you have experienced them for all this time?
Um, a little bit, yeah. And of course, I always have to go back and ask, how much of that is my own decision or my own actions, and how much are external circumstances. I feel a lot of the academic system right now is geared towards people who show an ultimate focus on this one thing, and with that they establish their scientific career, and then after maybe 5 to 10 years, when they become associate or full professor, that's when they're allowed to branch out and become actually sort of like diversify themselves again.
Hmm.
And I always had a strong interest in diversifying myself early. I mean, I really enjoyed the bench work. I enjoyed the biophysical work, but I actually like grant writing. I like researching new concepts. I do love to talk to people outside of my domain to maybe really see how we can solve a problem which is just novel, right? Almost irrespective of the disease, irrespective of methodology. So I get sidetracked by problems, and I guess I'm lacking this killer focus, this killer instinct to just sort of like hammer through on this one level.
I could definitely relate to being a little bit disorganized, in the sense of you're so curious about being scientist, about answering these different types of questions and problems. And I feel like that's where maybe being a scientist, classically trained scientist, and going into tenure, this is where maybe the fault lies of not necessarily supporting breadth of interests and sort of diversification of ideas. Like, is that kind of how you feel?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that's yeah. It is the I there seems to be a prevalence of people who take on a project of their mentor's lab and then basically build their own career on this. And I never felt that this would be the path I go. I mean, I always feel I'm very attracted by big picture questions and big picture answers. And this is part of the reasons why I ended up in the more entrepreneurial space as well, because I feel that the area where I try to make a difference, it's a big problem, it's a big question, and incremental advancements don't do justice. I think it just needs some really big push, and sometimes you gotta go for it.
Yeah. So on the entrepreneurial side, what is the thing that attracts you the most about branching out into this kind of very different space from science? Like, what was the push that told you, or like the spark that said, okay, I have to do this now?
It's probably learning about the specific core biological events. So you're a little bit familiar with this. My co-founder Jeff Allen and myself, we kind of started looking at the circulating cancer cell clusters as a strong primary driver of metastatic events, and the underlying issues you have. I mean, metastasis in cancer, of course, is a huge issue, and these circulating clusters are really primarily connected to some of the worst outcomes and worst prognosis patients can have. So we decided, what can we do? And we realized that there is not a lot known about them. It's difficult to capture them. So in a roundabout way, suddenly I find myself in an engineering approach, trying to capture these cells in a microfluidic fashion, but it harks back as so often to your own work. I mean, I looked at the properties there. Some of the characterization people were able to perform on them, and we found certain commonalities which directly link back to my PhD work. And based on this, I was able to design and come up with a biomimetic approach to capture these clusters. So it was a core problem. I mean, and this is now connected to so many other things. We started doing basic efficacy testing of cancer clusters in an in vitro setting, because we want to find out, if we capture clusters, can we actually not just analyze them, but can we actually use them for a direct therapeutic testing and all this. So now, could this be done in an academic setting? Of course.
I was just about to ask that. Yeah.
No, absolutely. You of course. But the problem is, I don't have the established expertise for that. Mm-hmm. So when I write grants on this subject matter, people will say like, well, he's not a cancer biologist. He's not a cell biologist.
Yeah.
Right. The question is not, can he do it? Or is there, is the rationale good? Or are the approaches described reasonable and achievable? It was just like, oh, this person is not who should do this work.
Yeah.
So I was perpetually running against this. And in the entrepreneurial space, that really falls away.
Yeah.
People just like, if you can convince somebody your idea is good and that you can execute it, then your chances are that you can get some funding and you can actually advance with that.
I think this is where academic research maybe failed to capture on your potential. And I think not just yours, but I think that's a good example of where academics is sort of a little bit maybe one-sided and one-minded when it comes to really taking people's ideas and just sort of really boxing them into their own expertise and not allowing them to really pursue things outside of what their expertise is.
Right. I think that is it's a common problem. And in particular for younger scientists who are expected to just have their heads down and focus and get their, 10 first author papers or whatever.
Do you feel like this is a problem of science in general, or is it like location dependent? Like in America, this situation is better or worse than in UK or Germany? What do you think is the other aspect of that?
Well, my scientific career really only took off in the UK and the US, so I can actually talk more about the UK and the US than I can do necessarily about Germany. I believe the UK is more friendly towards people working at the edges or slightly outside of their core expertise, as long as the rationale makes sense. Germany, I feel, would be less friendly towards that, but I can't actually, funny enough, I can't actually comment on that specifically. And in the US, there's a strong, people are put in boxes in this country in a way which is not always apparent.
So what do you mean by that exactly?
So in science and life science specifically, I think people ask like, what are you? Biophysicist, cell biologist, structural biologist, virologist, immunologist. There's a label, exactly. And we all know, of course, that science does span across many of these subject matters. I mean, yeah, it's just intrinsically, I don't even feel how I could argue differently. So why shouldn't I be a biophysicist who has a strong interest in cancer biology and cell biology, and admit that I would not be the best person to perform every cell-based experiment, but certainly have learned that with a talented postdoc, with a phenomenal grad student, this can be achieved. And more importantly, collaborations. Right? I mean, it's a team effort. Science should be a team effort. We should really advance together. I think we're not really in the area anymore where era where we have this one person coming up with this phenomenal hypothesis and proves it, right?
Yeah, it's increasingly hard to keep all the information in one brain. I mean,
Right.
you have to rely on other people. And I think in the industry, or like what we conventionally call industries like biopharmaceutical industry, you have the bigger effort to really diversify the people that you work with and just sort of
Right.
distribute this information and distribute the load that you sort of pursue. So it only makes sense that you would try and go into the entrepreneurial side of things. Do you feel being in San Diego helped you to jumpstart that idea than as compared to
Probably.
maybe other places in America?
Well, I mean, San Francisco, Boston, these would be the primary other areas that come to mind. I mean, there's some other great growing biotech areas. Texas has some really strong biotech growing, and obviously the Research Triangle in South Carolina is a very strong area too. So it's not exclusive, but San Diego does have a couple of strong advantages. In a fairly close area, we have 3 or 4 world-class institutes and universities with strong existing collaborative interactions, surrounded by many small startup companies, pharma companies, biotech companies, and of course the presence of some of the major pharma players. Mm-hmm. So I feel we have a really good and diverse scientific ecosystem available to us. And quite a few people move across this ecosystem from big pharma, maybe to a smaller startup, sometimes even into into academic research, like Nick Cosford, who came out of CBM Merck industry into an academic position, non-profit, but academic-like position at SBP. Mm-hmm. So I think that's quite unique to San Diego.
Do you feel you have an ability to now leverage your scientific background and actually keep learning all the business aspects that are related to the success of this new venture in San Diego specifically? Do you take advantage of maybe some of the mentors in the area, like venture capitalists or people like that?
Yeah, 100%. So in part of the entrepreneurial, as part of the startup adventure I'm on, we joined the San Diego Angel Conference, and that was the podcast Chris Conner and I talked about a couple of months ago. So was partially our journey within that. This is an amazing angel investment-based meeting of companies, startup companies across the board, not just life science, all sorts of technologies and ideas. But we received some amazing mentoring and tutoring within this program, and it's largely free of cost. I mean, it is pretty phenomenal what University of San Diego puts up there and provides to the community here. Mm-hmm. But then so many amazing individuals I talked to and who offer time, help, advice, and their contacts to us. I was able to establish a fantastic collaborative relationship to Professor Cassini at San Diego State University, and to other people at UCSD in the bioengineering department. I mean, all this was only possible because we are so physically close. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer in, if you start a collaboration, you have to have some personal rapport with people. I love to talk to people in person and understand them better and give them a chance to understand me better.
Yeah, I think this maybe comes from your experience in UK, right? Where you have these close personal interactions with people on the scientific level over a pint of beer. And I would be remiss not to mention, obviously, the crisis that we all face. Like, how did that lack of personal interaction affect maybe your entrepreneurial venture at that stage? Like, do you feel like you maybe are losing on some of that important networking?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the COVID-19 crisis, the lockdown, pretty much put a complete hold on the entrepreneurial activities. We had discussions going on with various companies where we're in a phase where we're very actively looking for partner and investment, and it just came to a screeching halt. Mm-hmm. People, unless you have that existing relationship, are reluctant to learn about new things and funny enough, I believe their risk awareness becomes sort of like more sensitized. Maybe they're becoming less likely to take a risk, maybe because
Yeah.
people are just generally less likely to take a risk for obvious reasons.
Yeah. So maybe taking a look at the COVID-19 implications for science in general, and it's a bit of a loaded question, but what do you feel is the most important thing that will come out from this crisis when it comes to how it will impact science, scientific community, scientific research, like the way we do science? Like, what do you feel as a researcher right now? What do you think will change as a result of this in your workflow, in your approach to do science?
What will change? I don't know. My crystal ball is broken, so well, I can't say for sure what will change.
What do you hope to change, maybe as a
what
result?
I hope for change is I hope the awareness how important basic science is becomes really strong again. I mean, we can't just keep taking the cream of some research, just like and monetizing it through a biotech or big pharma company without investing into our basic research.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't have people, I'm thinking sometimes 20 years ago, if I would have done my PhD in the life cycle of algae, people would have said you're crazy. And then 10 years ago, if I had a PhD in the life cycle of algae, I could command, a very sizable salary in a lot of the biofuel startup companies around.
Mm-hmm.
So that for me was always a science. Like, there aren't really irrelevant branches of science. They're just science branches which not yet have had their prime.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I think basic research does more than just fuel maybe industry, but basic research as well fuels people's fascination with nature. And I think basic research helps as well to maintain a healthy respect for our environment.
That is so deep. I know it might sound like a cliche, but I really believe this is true. Like, this is something I completely understand what you mean. It has to fuel this imagination and fascination with what's outside
Right.
of ourselves and within ourselves too. That's why we do
Right.
science, because
And
we are
outside,
curious.
outside. I mean, of course, we all want to make some money in our lives, and I'm certainly not a Luddite that I say, you cannot have a profit in what you do. But on the other side, not everything should be exclusively based on that.
Yeah.
So, and there have to be mechanisms that people who work really hard, and let's be honest, you look at an academic environment, you look at a non-profit, people work crazy hours often, spend many years training in a very specific and very difficult skill set,
Mm-hmm.
and have often not the ability to actually live an average life in a fairly expensive place like San Diego. So
Yeah.
it makes it difficult, and I think it sends a bit of a wrong message to the next generations.
Yeah, I could relate to that, because obviously a lot of my peers, sort of in my generation of scientists, if you will, are asking the question, which is, it's of academia versus industry. But I think now that we had this discussion, I feel like maybe it's not about that question really that we should be asking. Is like, why is our academic science does not allow us to pursue the questions that we want to pursue ultimately? Because I imagine a lot of the people that I know that are PhDs have still a fascination with science and with understanding of how we work, but maybe academic type of science does not necessarily allow us to have that quality of life that we really maybe want to have. And actually that's why we seek our opportunities to pursue and ask these questions
Right.
elsewhere.
And I'm not even, quality of life. I'm not talking about, wanting to own 4 houses and drive 5 cars. I mean, we're talking pretty basic levels here. So.
Yeah. So do you feel like, so I would say this, without necessarily really pointing fingers, but who is at fault more here? Are there scientists who maybe fail to communicate why our science is important? Is it legislature? Is it maybe something else? What do you think?
scientists are not necessarily the best always to advocate for their own case. I mean, there are, as with every other profession, you have a diversity of personalities, but traditionally scientists can become are not necessarily the best public communicators. Let's be honest here. So can they become better? And yes, but I think there are some fantastic efforts. I mean, the institute with their communications office. I mean, people really do go ahead, and people like you, right, who take to podcasts, who have the ability to maybe bring a scientific subject matter to a broader audience, I think are part of the solution for this one. I'm not so much looking at who's to blame. I'm always more looking, it's like, how can we actually advance this? How can we actually solve the problem? Not so much. Sometimes it is important to look at the causes, of course, but not so much. The cause is not so much at the culprit.
Yeah, I was actually planning on making a video, and I made a video. I just didn't publish it yet, about the perception of public when it comes to this crisis that we're dealing with,
Right.
which is to say, okay, industry like pharmaceuticals industry is at the forefront of the news headlines in terms of development of vaccines and treatments and so on and so forth, and it may create a sort of wrong perception in the public because the academic research now is taking more of a long-term approach of solving further pandemics questions,
Right.
and really going
Right.
thinking 5-10 years into the future. And I think this is a good opportunity for basic scientists to step in and say, what we're doing now is going to help you prevent this from happening in the future, and not just sort of just looking from the sidelines at all the amazing stuff that all the pharmaceutical companies are doing. So
yeah, I think I agree with that. So I think it is it is important, and academics do think ahead. I mean, there are grants out there where people really, it's like, how can we look for a broader solution to this instead of just chasing chasing once it's the fire started, but having more preemptive tools in our arsenal. And I'm very fortunate to be part of some of these efforts at the institute, with Sumit Chanda, for instance, in his lab, where he just received a very sizable DoD grant specifically looking for broadband antivirals. So that work is there and happening. Can this be supported by legislation? Of course, right? I mean, more funds put into research are necessary. I mean, you cannot expect with effectively reducing the budget of the NIH to solve major future health crises.
yeah. Do you find yourself having more time now as a result of this crisis to, spend time with the family or friends or otherwise?
Well, friends, not so much.
Well, I guess, yeah, sure.
I do spend more time with the family to some extent, but I've been actually personally very, very busy over the last 2.5 months. I was in the lab pretty much every day.
Oh, wow.
And supporting the work in the Chanda lab, and helping out with some of the other essential tasks that need to be performed so we can go back and continue our research. I am very fortunate that the very good-looking American, as you said earlier, who holds me in this country, is also an amazing mother, and she is the one who has taken the burden and the brunt of our homeschooling requirements.
Mm-hmm.
With a 6 and an 8-year-old, it's often quite interesting. 2 boys are a handful.
Yeah.
So we spend more time together for sure. But I don't necessarily have more time. I try to balance some things. We do certainly get our physical exercise in. I go running or cycling with the boys early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I on the weekends, if I have some time, I try to do some woodwork actually.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, that's nice.
to
relax. Do you make them speak German with you by any chance?
Yes, they're both bilingual. They actually attend the German Pacific School San Diego, which is a fantastic language school. Not
of which you're a president.
Of which, in addition, I'm acting, or I'm currently the president of the board.
Uh-huh.
So this is a really fantastic supplementary educational program. for bilingual German speakers,
I-
or even people with a strong interest in German.
Are you obviously? I'm assuming you do like online classes nowadays.
Yes, the school has moved to a full online system already back in March.
Mhm.
I was very impressed. The principal, Christine Johnson, I mean, she and the teachers were amazing. I mean, there are, of course, as always, the people who do all the work. You know, the board is there, we supervise, we help, and we support, but the core work is all done by the teachers and the principal. And within, I think, a few days, they were able to set up online classes and switch over. I mean, my
Wow.
hat off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I now that I hope to have maybe a little bit more time on my hands, maybe I will take you up on that offer that we discussed a while back during the fundraiser,
Yeah.
talking about supporting, of actually maybe learning a bit more German.
Well,
So as we wrap up our discussion, like, I guess one last question I had
Sure.
to you, and maybe to our audience. So why should Americans switch from drinking Coors Light or Bud Light to drinking German Riesling?
that is a fantastic question. I love it because I've always been a red wine person more, but a very good friend of mine and her, well, actually two friends, a couple, who own a German import wine store here, were so gracious to host a wine tasting event in support of the German school, and where you were so kind to come and support the efforts.
Yeah.
And she's German and he's American, so a very similar situation to me, my wife. And he reintroduced me to some amazing German Riesling. And when I was 16, 17 years old, living in Germany, already legal to drink, Riesling for me was just like a sweet, juicy, not very pleasant alcoholic beverage.
Mhm.
And I probably pretty much dismissed it back in those days as something not worth my consideration. But I am absolutely gobsmacked, the flavor, the complexity, and how pleasant it is. So the only solution I can have is you should try. So you'd be surprised how pleasant it is to enjoy a chilled glass of Gützler Riesling.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Peter, for joining me today on this podcast. It was a real pleasure.